In the summer of 1588, a fleet of around 130 wooden galleons sailed up the English Channel under Spanish colors. It was one of the largest sailing fleets the world had ever seen. Spain was the superpower of the age. It owned the silver mines of the Americas, the finest soldiers in Europe, and a king, Philip II, who was certain that God stood behind him. England was a small, poor Protestant island on the edge of the map, ruled by a queen her enemies called a heretic. By every measure that counted, England should have lost. It didn't. And the story of why is also the story of how a cold, rainy island ended up ruling a quarter of the entire world. We are going to show you both sides of that story. We won't tell you who the heroes were and who the villains were. We will show you what happened, and we will let you decide. Picture the Channel on the night of the 7th of August. The Spanish galleons lie anchored off Calais in a tight, disciplined crescent, waiting to escort an invasion army across from the Netherlands. The English commanders, Lord Howard and Francis Drake, know they cannot break that wall of timber by force, so they don't try. Just after midnight, 8 old sailing ships drift out of the darkness toward the Spanish line, their canvas sails set, their wooden hulls packed with pitch and gunpowder and burning. Fireships. Panic does what the cannon could not. The Spanish captains cut their anchor ropes and scatter into open water, and the crescent that kept them safe is gone. At first light, the English galleons fall on them off grave lines and fight with cannon at close range for hours. Then the weather takes over. A long Atlantic gale drives the surviving Spanish galleons north under broken masts, with no way back through the Channel, around the top of Scotland and onto the rocks of Ireland. Of the 130 ships that set out, barely 60 limped home. As many as 15,000 men never returned at all. Medals were struck across Protestant Europe to mark the victory. One of them carried a single line of Latin. He blew, and they were scattered. Elizabeth's England decided the storm had been the breath of a Protestant god. Whatever you make of that, the effect was the same. A nation this small had faced down the most powerful empire on earth and survived. And once a country starts to believe the ordinary rules no longer apply to it, the only question left is where to point that confidence. England pointed it at the sea. On the last day of the year 1600, a group of London merchants in ruffs and doublets knelt before Elizabeth I and received a royal charter sealed in wax. They gave themselves a careful, forgettable name, the Governor and Company of Merchants of London, trading into the East Indies. The world would come to know them as the East India Company. And here is the part most people are never taught. The British Empire did not begin with a king or a conquering army. It began with a business plan, a private company of merchants, owned by its shareholders, chasing pepper, cloves, and silk on the far side of the world. The idea that powered it was new, and it outlived everyone who built it. Instead of one merchant gambling his whole fortune on a single voyage that might sink, hundreds of investors pooled their money. They shared the risk, and they split the profit. One lost galleon no longer ruined a family. This is the joint stock company, the ancestor of the great trading houses that came after it. With it, the company could do what no single merchant ever could. It could build fleets of galleons, hire companies of musketeers, absorb years of losses, and simply outlast its rivals. And the risk was real. A voyage by sail to the Indies and back could take 2 years. Crews died of scurvy, of fever, of storms, and of each other. A merchant who invested might wait years to learn whether he had been made rich or left ruined. They accepted those odds because the reward, when a galleon finally came home full, was staggering. In his candlelit counting house, a single successful cargo could earn a merchant double or triple what the whole voyage had cost. But the English were not first, and they were not the strongest. The Dutch had reached the Spice Islands ahead of them, and they defended them without mercy. In 1623, on the island of Amboina, Dutch officials tortured and executed a group of English traders, and the message was received. The Spice Islands were closed, so the company turned toward a vast and wealthy land the Dutch had not locked down: India. In 1613, it opened its first permanent trading post, a factory of timber and stone at the port of Surat. The English did not arrive as conquerors, they arrived as supplicants. India in 1613 was richer than England. The Mughal Empire that ruled it was one of the great powers of the world, its marble cities larger than London, its weavers producing cotton finer than anything Europe could make. An English envoy in a plumed hat spent years at the Mughal court simply asking for the right to trade, one minor foreigner among many. The empire of the future began on its knees. For the investor back in London, all of this was opportunity. For the ports the company touched, it was something more complicated. At first, it was simply trade, an exchange that suited both sides. Indian weavers gained an enormous new customer, English buyers gained cloth and spice. But trade on this scale needed protection, and protection meant armed men with muskets, and armed men slowly changed who set the terms. The shift was so gradual that the people living through it barely noticed the moment a guest had become a landlord. While the company looked east, other Englishmen looked west. In 1607, around 104 settlers landed on a swampy peninsula in Virginia and built a wooden fort they named Jamestown after their king. The first years were brutal. Disease, hunger, and a winter so desperate the survivors simply called it the starving time. Most of the original settlers died. What finally saved the colony was not gold. It was a plant. Tobacco. Europe could not get enough of it, and Virginia could grow it without end. But tobacco is hungry. It demands land, and the land already belonged to the Powhatan people who lived there. And it demands labor, far more than free settlers could ever supply. That hunger led straight to the darkest thread in the whole story. In 1619, an English sailing ship landed at Point Comfort and sold around 20 captive Africans in exchange for food. They were among the first Africans sold in England's American colonies. Within 2 generations, it was no longer a trickle. In 1672, the Crown chartered the Royal African Company, and the buying and selling of human beings became, like the spice trade before it, a chartered business with shareholders and a ledger. The empire that set out chasing pepper would come to run, in large part on people who were bought, shipped, and sold. Step back far enough, and a pattern appears, and it repeats for the next 300 years. A company or a colony arrives to trade. Trade needs security. Security needs control. Control becomes government. The British Empire was almost never designed in advance by anyone. It was assembled piece by piece, trading post by trading post, treaty by treaty, very often by men in counting houses who told themselves they were only doing business. A company of merchants that quietly began to rule like a king. None of it was new even then. We only find the original. And here both sides of the ledger sit together and refuse to be separated. The same galleons that carried away cotton, tea, and saltpeter carried back roads, a written legal code, and a language that would one day belong to much of the world. The same company that opened new trade also broke old economies, drew borders that would outlast the empire itself, and decided the fate of millions who were never asked. To a shareholder in London, it was a dividend, paid twice a year. To a weaver in Bengal whose market had collapsed, it was the end of a world. Both of those things are true at the same time. Neither one cancels the other out. By the year 1700, the pieces were all on the board. A small island that now believed it could beat anyone. A private company with its own fleet of galleons and its own musketeers. Colonies taking root on 2 continents and counting houses in London that turned distant labor into profit, and profit into still more galleons. The empire was no longer an accident waiting to happen. It had become a system, and the system was learning how to grow. In the next episode, that system meets India in earnest. A trading company stops asking for permission, raises an army of its own sepoys, and within a single lifetime becomes the ruler of 60 million people, without ever winning a single vote. This was part 1, The Spark. Subscribe and travel forward through the empire with us.